Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we'll be talking about a case that actually happened in July of this year, but it was something that kind of went over my radar at the time, but I still want to talk about it now because I think it's a really valuable case study to look at. It's the fall of a 158-year-old business at the hands of a rather simple mistake. KNP Logistics, formerly the Knights of Old, was a 158-year-old transportation firm. Most businesses are unfortunately doomed to fail, with about half collapsing after 5 years. So to make it past even 50 is a celebration, let alone 158 years. Few things can sink a business that strong enough to have passed the test of time up until that point. But of course, all bets are off when it comes to information security. The UK-based company was victim to the Achilles ransomware group, and ransomware sadly has killed many organizations before. A few years ago, I even covered a whole school that had to shut down due to being unable to recover from a ransomware attack. The attack, however, was far from sophisticated and could have happened at any point. There was a ticking time bomb that existed within KNP Logistics that was just bound to go off at some point. A single point of failure so weak that it toppled the entire firm to the ground. It was the bad password of one employee. When the Akira group targeted KNP, they found an employee account which did not have multi-factor authentication enabled, and they were able to successfully guess the password. Multi-factor authentication is when you have to authenticate using another factor. A password is a factor that falls under something you know. Other factors can include something you have, like your cell phone, or something you are, like your biometrics, an iris scan, a fingerprint scan, or a face scan. Multi-factor authentication has become pretty standard. Most commonly, it's in the form of one-time passwords that are sent to your device or rotated very regularly within an authentication app. Sometimes these tokens are even on little USB keys. Either way, for whatever reason, this second factor did not exist, and there was nothing protecting the firm from this bad password that also seems to have gone entirely unnoticed. With no MFA, the bad password let them right in. Once attackers got a foothold in, there's lots of methods they can use to escalate privileges and spread far and wide throughout the environment, which is exactly what they did, deploying ransomware across all systems in the organization, encrypting everything. They also made the effort to destroy backups and disaster recovery systems, which really should not have been accessible from their main systems at all. The most secure backups should be kept offline so they can't be impacted in this way. With this, KNP had no path forward to recover anything. No backups, no disaster recovery. Those were the options they had. Now with those gone, they either have to rebuild everything completely from scratch, or pay the ransom. Paying a ransom is seldom recommended because, well, it's just funding these cybercrime operations, and sometimes there's not a guarantee that you'll actually get anything back. Ransomware actors do typically give you access back because if they don't, no one would pay them. They'd have the reputation of not paying back, and that's not one you tend to want to have. So usually they do, but still, in some cases, they won't, or they'll only give you partial access back. It's a bit of a tricky thing to balance, but in this case, there's not really much else you can do. From the outside, KNP operations came to a standstill. Every truck they operated was sidelined, and no data could be accessed at all. They had cyber insurance, and those insurers did bring in a couple of cyber crisis consultants to assess the situation, which they then deemed to be the worst-case scenario for just about any organization, and based on what I've read, I'm inclined to agree. There is really nothing you can do here, and it's pretty grim. Both rebuilding your entire IT environment, including data that you can never get back, and paying a ransom are both incredibly expensive, just in different ways. It's hard to put a price on proprietary data that's supposed to be internal. Even if you move forward with rebuilding, that's something you'll likely never completely get back. Speaking of expenses, though, the ransom demanded was £5 million, which, according to the Google conversion when I wrote this script, was $6.7 million US. This was a price that KPN just couldn't afford to pay. So they did what I don't think anyone expected, and surely the ransomware actors were also pissed about, was just shut down, laying off 700 employees. This attack was beyond destroying an organization that had been around for over a century. It also affects these people who no longer have a job to support themselves or their families. And the local economy also lost a significant supplier of transportation services. The KPN incident was tragic, but it's something more common than you think. It only takes one weak credential for a hacker to get a foothold into an organization and spread malware throughout. What is extra sad is that this was preventable. KNP did technically meet industry standards for cybersecurity, but industry standards often just aren't enough. They should be seen as kind of a bare minimum, rather than something one should aspire for, because it's a standard, it's a minimum. So, what exactly could have been done about this? Password policies that prevent weak passwords should have definitely been enforced. Ideally, passwords should be compared against a dictionary of known leaked and bad passwords, as these are frequently used by hackers to crack down on low-hanging fruit. Hackers literally have whole dictionaries of passwords that have previously been leaked, and a super common method of performing password attacks is to go after passwords that are known already. A lot of password attacks aren't actually just manually breaking encryption, reversing hashing algorithms to try to get the credentials. It's either through phishing, or it's through finding accounts that have had their passwords leaked and hoping that they reuse passwords. Password reuse is a major, major problem, and it likely contributed to this as well. Though the password also was generally weak. Password policies are kind of confusing, and I honestly think a lot of organizations do take it a bit too far. Length is the most important factor for passwords, and they should be a minimum of 12 characters long in my opinion. I'm not going to be super picky about things like special characters or complexity rules of that nature, because often it can make passwords really hard to recover. I also think that passwords should not be rotated as much as many people want to rotate them. Only rotate passwords after a known breach has occurred, because if you need to change them every year, realistically what's going to happen is someone's going to put a number on the end of the password, and then the number goes up every year. And I can already tell you that number is either going to start with 1 and then go up to 2, 3, 4, 5, or it's going to start with the year and just keep going up every year. I've seen this a lot. You'd be surprised. As I mentioned earlier, multi-factor authentication also should have been required for all employee accounts. Multi-factor authentication is definitely becoming a standard now, and there are a lot of different ways to implement it. It's not actually that difficult. If the account had multi-factor authentication that required some kind of additional token, fingerprint, security key, or even just a push notification sent to the phone, this may have been able to be avoided entirely. Even with a bad, completely guessable password, if there's a second factor, the hacker shouldn't be able to get in at all, unless they put in a lot of other effort trying to fish that factor out of the user. And depending on what that factor is, it may be rather difficult. Having backup and disaster recovery systems is good, and everyone should have that, but they should not be attached to your main production systems. And this is because they're a very obvious target of opportunity for hackers. If they notice you have a backup and DR system, they're obviously also going to try to take those down, so you're more likely to pay the ransom. Ideally, backups are mostly offline, and they're only online when you actually need to back up your data. After that, they should be taken offline so they're not touchable. Still, these oversights are actually easy to make in the grand scheme of things when you're focused on technical security controls and just meeting standards. Especially if maybe you are an older company struggling to keep up with the times. That's why it's important to have cybersecurity experts who understand the threat landscape and learn more about things as they evolve, because things change every single year. The threat landscape is vastly different than it was when I started this podcast, and that was only like 3 years ago. Almost 4 years ago. It's my anniversary's in February. I think cases like KNP can be examined as a case study on what went wrong and how can we prevent it from going wrong in the future. There's some very obvious targets of opportunity here, but it just goes to show the importance of really keeping up with cybersecurity. Thank you to the Hacker News, Tech.co, and CybersecurityInsiders.com for information on this attack, kind of the circumstances around it, and why this shut down a whole 158-year-old company. Cases like this kind of make me sad, not just because I care deeply about transportation companies. I didn't really know it existed until I started researching for this, but because it's really just the little things sometimes that you don't think are going to be a big deal, or things you don't even notice because you don't know how to monitor for it. Even small things like someone having their password set to password 123 can shut down an entire company. But of course, I would also like to thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime. Whether you're a new listener or you've been listening for a while, I always really appreciate it, and this is kind of why I do this, is to help people understand the cybersecurity threat landscape in a way that's not, hopefully, so terrifying, maybe a little terrifying. You can have a little bit of terror in your life, that's okay. Anyways, until next time, stay secure.